The alien woman returned from the Star Wars and asked, "Have you forgotten me?" Human HFY James Carter sat by the window in his small apartment in New York City, watching the bustling streets below. The city was always alive, a constant hum of movement and noise, but tonight something felt different. The sky above, which had always seemed so ordinary, was now lit by something strange, a deep, pulsing light that made him pause, his gaze drawn upward. It wasn't the usual planes or satellites. No, this was something far bigger, something that cast a shadow across the city as it slowly descended. His heart raced, his mind struggling to make sense of what he was seeing. The shape was massive, clearly not of Earth, and the light around it flickered in a way that almost seemed alive. James stood up, his instincts kicking in. He had seen enough strange things in his life. He had once been a soldier, after all, but nothing like this. The ship's descent seemed almost deliberate, as if it were making its way straight toward him, to the very spot where he stood. There was a sudden roar of engines, and the world around him seemed to tremble as the ship touched down in Central Park, its size so vast that it swallowed the entire landscape. For a moment, everything went silent. James felt the air grow still, as if the world itself were holding its breath. And then, without warning, the hatch of the enormous ship opened with a hiss, releasing a swirl of energy and light. A figure stepped out, her presence so striking that it stole the breath from his lungs. She was tall, her skin shimmering with a strange, iridescent glow. Her eyes were deep, like twin pools of stars, and her long hair flowed in waves, as though moved by some invisible force. She was dressed in what seemed to be a combination of armor and ceremonial robes, a design that was both elegant and intimidating. Her posture was regal, and as she took one step forward, she looked directly at James, her gaze locking onto his. "Have you forgotten me, human?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with an undeniable power that seemed to vibrate through the air. Her words were not harsh, but they carried the weight of a question that pierced deep into his soul. James froze. He knew that voice. He had heard it before in dreams that felt more like memories. He had seen her face in flashes of light, moments when he had been a different person, fighting battles on a faraway world. But it was impossible. The memories were fragmented, and the face that haunted his mind had always seemed like a dream. How could she be here now? Who are you?" James managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. His heart raced, pounding in his chest, as if his body were telling him that this was something far more important than just a chance encounter. The woman took another step toward him, her expression softening as if she could sense the confusion and fear swirling within him. "I am Lyrian," she said, her tone gentle now. "A leader of the Zorak. You fought beside me once long ago during the Star Wars. Don't you remember?" Lyrian's words hit him like a shockwave, a sudden flood of memories rushing to the surface. The war, the battles against an empire that had threatened to destroy everything, the strange alliance between humans and her people, the Zorak. It all came flooding back, though in disjointed flashes. There were images of battles, of alien landscapes, of strange starships, and of her, the way she had looked at him, the way her hand had touched his shoulder in the midst of chaos. But it was all hazy, too distant to grasp. "No," James muttered, shaking his head, his mind a whirlwind of confusion. "I don't remember anything. I can't remember anything." Lyrian's expression shifted, a mix of sadness and understanding in her eyes. She stepped closer, now standing only a few feet away from him. "It was necessary," she said softly, as though explaining something painful. "Your memories were erased to protect you, to protect humanity. But the time has come for you to remember, James. The empire we fought against, it's back, stronger than ever." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. The empire? The same empire that had nearly crushed the Zorak and their allies, the same one that had pushed Earth to the brink of destruction. Lyrian continued, her voice filled with urgency. "We need your help, James. You know, things that only you can remember. The tactics, the strategies, the way the empire thinks. You were part of a mission that only you can complete." James took a step back, his mind racing. The war, the empire, the Zorak, all of it seemed so far away now. His life was simple, quiet. He had left those battles behind when he had returned to Earth, hoping to forget. But now, standing before him was the woman who had once fought beside him, asking him to return to a life he thought was gone. "Why me?" he asked, his voice rough with uncertainty. "Why not someone else? Why do you need me?" Lyrian's gaze softened, her eyes filled with an emotion that James couldn't quite place. Because you are the key. You were the one who infiltrated the heart of their empire. You know their weaknesses, their flaws, and you have something that the Empire never anticipated, a connection to Earth, to humanity. James stared at her, his mind still reeling. He wanted to believe her, to trust her, but it all seemed too impossible. How could he have been part of something so important, something that could change the fate of an entire galaxy? And yet, deep inside, something stirred. A flicker of recognition, a feeling that he had been destined for more than just a quiet life. "How do you know all of this?" he asked, his voice quieter now. Lyrian sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly as if carrying a heavy burden. "I know because I was there. I watched as you fought, as you made choices that no one else could have made. You saved us, James." "You saved me." James looked at her, trying to make sense of her words. "I don't remember, but if I helped you, then why didn't I?" Lyrian cut him off gently. "The memory erasure was not your choice, James. It was done to protect you. The Empire's forces had the ability to track your mind, to find you even across the galaxy. We had no choice but to erase your memories and send you back to Earth, where they could not reach you. But now, the time has come to stop them once and for all." James looked out the window, his gaze drifting to the lights of the city below. It was peaceful here. But he knew, deep down, that the peace would not last. The Empire was coming, and once again humanity would be caught in the crossfire. He turned back to Lyrian, her eyes filled with determination. "What do you need me to do?" Lyrian's expression softened into a small smile. "We need to rebuild the Alliance. The Zorak have their forces ready, but they cannot fight alone. Earth must be prepared. And you, James, must lead them." James felt the weight of her words settle on him, the responsibility of the task she was asking him to take on. He didn't know if he was ready, if he could remember enough, but one thing was certain. The world was about to change again. And this time he would be at the heart of it. "Lead them," he repeated almost to himself. "All right, I'll help you, but I don't know where to start." Lyrian nodded. "We'll start by uncovering your memories. We'll unlock everything that's been hidden from you. Together, we'll stop the Empire before they can destroy everything you've ever known." James nodded slowly, feeling a strange sense of resolve wash over him. The memories, the mission, the woman before him, all of it was real, even if it seemed impossible. And maybe, just maybe, he wasn't meant to forget after all. The days that followed were a blur for James. At first, he thought the whole encounter with Lyrian might have been a dream or some sort of hallucination brought on by stress. But the more he tried to push it away, the more his mind returned to that moment. Her glowing eyes, her voice full of both sadness and urgency. He couldn't ignore it. He couldn't pretend he hadn't heard the truth in her words. Lyrian had told him they needed to prepare Earth. The Empire was coming, and this time they would not be easy to defeat. She had come to him because she believed he had something no one else did, knowledge of the Empire's inner workings and the ability to make their attack fail. But James didn't feel special. He didn't feel like the man she had described, the one who had once fought alongside her and the Zorak, saving lives and making impossible decisions. All he felt now was confusion and fear. Still, he knew that sitting idly by wasn't an option. The Empire, whatever it was, had already proven its power. He had seen the fear in Lyrian's eyes and the way the world seemed to tremble at her words. So he agreed. The following morning, he met Lyrian again, this time on the roof of his apartment building. She had said it would be safe there, away from the prying eyes of the world. The roof overlooked the city, and the sun was just beginning to rise, casting a golden hue over the skyline. He could see the ships, huge, sleek, and menacing, hovering high above the city. Their outlines shimmered in the early light like ghosts, a reminder that the galaxy was no longer as distant as it once had been. Lyrian was waiting for him, her posture as graceful as ever, but there was something different about her today. She seemed more urgent, more focused. He wondered if the weight of the galaxy had finally started to press down on her too. "James," she greeted him, her voice calm, though there was a hint of something else, something he couldn't place. "I'm glad you're here. We have much to discuss." James nodded, trying to push down the knot of tension in his stomach. He could feel the cool morning breeze against his skin, but it did little to calm him. "What's the plan?" he asked, his voice rough with uncertainty. "How do we stop them?" Lyrian studied him for a moment, as if weighing his sincerity. Then, without a word, she gestured for him to follow. They made their way to a hidden room beneath the building, where a small, advanced piece of Zorak technology was waiting for them. A device that, at first glance, looked like little more than a simple metal box. This, Lyrian explained, is a memory retrieval module. It was designed to restore lost memories. It was used on soldiers who had been captured by the Empire and brainwashed into serving them. We can use it to unlock your memories, James. All of them. The mission, the war, everything. James looked at the device, his heart pounding in his chest. He hadn't thought about his lost memories for years. The idea of recovering them scared him more than he cared to admit. What if what he saw was too much? What if he couldn't handle it? But Lyrian's steady gaze kept him grounded. She was asking for his trust, something he wasn't sure he could offer, but in this moment there was no other choice. "You won't be alone," she assured him, her voice gentle. "I'll be with you the whole time. We will face this together." With a deep breath, James nodded. He sat down in front of the device, his fingers trembling as he placed them on the cool surface. He felt a strange tingle on his skin, a soft hum that seemed to resonate deep within him. The room around him began to fade, replaced by flashes of light and images that blurred together. He was no longer sitting in the small room beneath his apartment. He was back in the past, standing in the midst of a battlefield. The sounds of distant explosions and the whirring of alien technology filled the air, and the ground beneath his feet seemed to vibrate with the force of the conflict. James saw himself in a uniform, his face younger, his body leaner, but the fear and determination in his eyes were the same. He was running, dodging blasts, leading a squad of soldiers across a ravaged landscape. The sky above was dark with smoke, and the air was thick with the stench of burning metal and sulfur. And then, through the chaos, he saw her. Lyrian stood tall, her radiant armor gleaming even in the dim light of the battlefield. She was at the forefront of a Zorak unit, her eyes locked onto him as if she had been waiting for him. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment everything else disappeared. The sounds of war faded, the chaos fell silent, and there was only her and him standing in that single moment. "James," she called, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "We need to move now. The Empire is closing in." His heart pounded in his chest as the memory surged forward, clear and vivid. He could see himself nodding, acknowledging her command without hesitation. They had worked together seamlessly, a partnership forged in the fire of battle. "Stay close," Lyrian had said, her voice steady. "We'll make it through this." The memory shifted again, and James found himself in a different place, an underground command center with maps of the galaxy pinned on the walls. He could hear the voices of commanders, both human and Zorak, discussing strategies, planning their next moves. James had been at the center of it all, coordinating the forces, offering his knowledge of the Empire's tactics. The commanders respected him, listened to him, and he had felt something deep inside, a sense of purpose, a feeling that in that moment he mattered. But then the memory began to blur, the edges fraying as if something was trying to keep him from seeing it. He felt the familiar tug of his past, of what had been erased, and tried to push through the fog, but it was difficult. The more he tried, the harder it became. Lyrian's voice cut through the haze, gentle yet firm. "James, focus, you're almost there. The memories are returning. You are strong, you can do this." With her encouragement, James pushed forward. He felt the memories solidify, each piece snapping into place like the final parts of a puzzle. He remembered the strategy that had crippled the Empire's forces, the infiltration mission he had led deep into enemy territory. He remembered the night they had launched their final assault, the one that had turned the tide of the war. He had been part of a team that had stolen the Empire's most important secret, a weapon capable of wiping out entire planets, and he had delivered it to the Zorak. But the victory had come at a cost. The final memory hit him with the force of a punch. He saw himself standing in front of a control panel, ready to launch the weapon. The look on Lyrian's face, the fear in her eyes as she reached out to stop him, was one he would never forget. They had disagreed. She had wanted to find another way, a way that didn't involve using such devastating power. But James had been resolute. The Empire had to be stopped, no matter the cost. And now, as the memory faded, James understood. The memories had been erased not just to protect him, but to protect the galaxy from the consequences of that decision. The Empire had retaliated, sending a psychic strike to erase his mind, to keep him from ever remembering the price of victory. James gasped, his breathing shallow as the memories settled back into his mind. The room around him returned, the hum of the memory retrieval device still buzzing in the air. He looked up at Lyrian, his eyes wide with shock. "I I remember, he whispered, his voice barely a breath. I remember everything. Lyrian smiled softly, her eyes filled with understanding. Good, you're ready now. James stood slowly, his legs weak from the overwhelming flood of memories. He felt as though he had just woken up from a long, heavy sleep. The weight of everything, his past, his decisions, his responsibilities, pressed down on him, but he also felt something else, clarity. I remember, he repeated, more to himself than to her. I remember what we lost. And I remember how we can win this. Lyrian nodded. Yes, the Empire will not take this galaxy from us, not again. James took a deep breath, steadying himself. He wasn't just James Carter, the engineer, anymore. He was a soldier, a leader, and a man with a purpose. And the war wasn't over yet. James spent the next few days in a fog of confusion and urgency. His mind was no longer his own. It was a whirlwind of memories, battlefields, starships, strategies, and the weight of decisions made in the heat of war. The flood of images, feelings, and connections he had tried so hard to forget now filled his every waking moment. It was like he was caught between two worlds, the quiet life he had built on Earth and the dangerous, uncertain future that Lyrian had shown him. The conflict was all around him, pushing him forward even though he felt like he was standing still. But the truth was undeniable. The galaxy had changed, and so had he. The moment Lyrian had reappeared, it was clear to him that he couldn't just hide behind the safety of a quiet life anymore. The Empire was coming, and Earth was the next target. James, Lyrian had said one evening, as they sat in the makeshift command room beneath his apartment. The walls were lined with maps and star charts glowing softly in the dim light. Her gaze was steady, her voice calm but filled with a resolve that was hard to ignore. We need to move forward. The Empire is advancing, and we need to prepare. James rubbed his eyes, feeling the weight of exhaustion pulling at him. He hadn't slept properly in days. I don't know if I'm ready for all of this, Lyrian, he admitted, his voice quieter than he intended. I've been living a normal life for so long. How do I go from that to this, leading a war against a galaxy-spanning empire? Lyrian's expression softened, but her eyes were still full of determination. You were never meant to live a normal life, James. You were part of something bigger before, and you still are. You have something that the Empire never counted on, the heart of humanity. The way we fight, the way we survive against all odds, that's something they'll never understand. And that's why we need you. He met her gaze, and for the first time in days, he felt something more than fear. He felt a sense of purpose rising within him, faint but undeniable. Maybe she was right. Maybe he was part of something greater than he had ever realized. Lyrian had already started gathering resources, information, allies, and technology. But there was one thing they needed before they could launch a full-scale resistance. James had once been part of a covert mission that had infiltrated the heart of the Empire, and though his memories of it were fragmented, he still knew the locations of several key Imperial facilities. These places held information, weapons, and resources that could tip the balance in their favor. The problem was, they were heavily guarded, and getting to them would require everything James had learned during his time as a soldier. They couldn't wait any longer. The Empire's fleet was already in Earth's orbit, and the first wave of attacks had begun. Cities were being bombarded with laser strikes from space, and Earth's defenses were hopelessly outmatched. Lyrian's people had managed to protect some of the most important locations on the planet, but the fight had to be taken to the Empire's doorstep. James had to make a choice: stay and watch as the world he knew fell apart, or take the fight to the Empire, risking everything. I'll do it, James said finally, the decision settling deep in his gut. I'll lead the strike teams, but we need more than just tactics. We need hope. We need the people to believe that they can fight back. Lyrian nodded. I will rally the Zorak forces, but you're right. Humanity is our greatest strength. They will follow you, James. They just need to know that they're not alone. And so, they set their plan in motion. James began working with the human resistance groups, which had formed in scattered places around the world. These groups had fought the Empire's first attacks, but they were disorganized and lacked the resources to make a significant impact. James had to remind them of their strength, of the fire that burned in the hearts of the people. He spoke to them in simple terms, telling them that they weren't fighting just for survival, they were fighting for their future. The training began immediately. Soldiers, civilians, scientists, and engineers, everyone worked together to prepare for the missions ahead. James coordinated with the resistance, assigning targets, creating diversion plans, and making sure each team had the weapons and knowledge they needed. Lyrian's people shared their advanced technology, which gave Earth's forces a fighting chance, but it was humanity's ingenuity that would make the difference. It wasn't easy. The Empire's forces were relentless. As the weeks passed, the world became a battleground. Every day brought new victories, but with them came losses. Cities fell and families were torn apart, but James could see the change in the people. The fear that had once held them back was now replaced with defiance. They weren't just defending their homes. They were fighting back, standing up to an enemy that had crushed entire civilizations. As James stood before a group of resistance fighters one morning, ready to brief them on the next mission, he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of pride. The war had changed him, transformed him from a man trying to forget his past into a leader who understood the importance of their struggle. He wasn't just remembering the past anymore. He was living it. Every decision he made carried the weight of 1,000 lives, but it also carried the hope of those who believed in him. Lyrian was always at his side, a constant presence in the midst of the chaos. Her strength and wisdom guided him, even when the battles seemed impossible. She was a warrior, yes, but also a diplomat, a leader who knew how to unite different factions and bring them together for a common cause. Together, they formed a bond that was unshakable, one built on trust, respect, and shared history. She had saved him once, and now it was his turn to protect her. One night, as they watched the stars from the rooftop of their makeshift command center, James couldn't help but ask the question that had been gnawing at him for days. "Lyrian," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why me? Why did you come back for me?" Lyrian looked at him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. She didn't answer immediately, and for a moment, James wondered if she even had an answer. But then she spoke, her voice low and steady. "Because you were always more than just a soldier, James. You had something the Empire never understood, compassion. You saw the people, the lives at stake, and you fought not just to win, but to protect. And that's why I trust you. You fight for the right reasons. You fight for something bigger than yourself." James swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking in. He had never thought of himself as anything more than a soldier, a man who did what he was told. But now, as he stood on the brink of war, he understood. He was fighting for his world, for the people he loved, and for the future of humanity. In the days that followed, the Resistance launched their first major offensive. It was a daring raid on an Imperial stronghold, one that could cripple their supply lines and buy Earth some time. James led the charge, his heart pounding in his chest as he watched the men and women who had once been civilians now fighting with the skill and precision of seasoned soldiers. The battle was fierce, the sound of gunfire and explosions echoing through the streets. But with every victory, the resistance grew stronger, and the Empire's hold on Earth weakened. It was only the beginning, but it was a start. As James watched the Empire's forces retreat, he knew they had only won a small battle. But it was a victory nonetheless, and one that sent a clear message to the galaxy. Humanity would not go down without a fight. "We're just getting started," James muttered to himself, watching the stars above. "We'll fight them to the end." Lyrian stood beside him, her eyes scanning the horizon. "Yes," she said, her voice filled with quiet confidence. "And we'll win together." James smiled, his heart filled with a new sense of purpose. The war wasn't over, but he had found his place in it. And he would fight not just for Earth, but for the future they all deserved. James couldn't remember the last time he had felt this alive or this terrified. The war had taken so much from him, and yet it had given him something in return. A purpose. A reason to keep fighting, to lead, and to believe that humanity could still win. As the days passed, the stakes grew higher. The Empire wasn't going to give up easily. Their forces were stronger than anyone had expected, and every victory seemed to bring them back with even more ferocity. But every loss, every sacrifice was met with a renewed determination. They weren't going to let their world fall. Not now, not after everything they had fought for. The resistance had grown in strength and numbers. What had started as a scattered, disorganized group of civilians and soldiers was now a well-oiled machine, coordinated by James and the Zorak. Lyrian had proven to be an invaluable ally, sharing her knowledge of the Empire and the tactics they had used in their last war. The Zorak's advanced technology, combined with the humans' ingenuity and fighting spirit, was slowly turning the tide. The Empire's forces had underestimated humanity, and that mistake was proving to be costly. One morning, as the sun rose over the battlefield of Earth, James received troubling news. A massive fleet of Imperial warships was en route to Earth, and they weren't alone. Along with the fleet came the Empire's deadliest weapon, a battle station the size of a small moon designed to obliterate entire planets. If they didn't act fast, Earth wouldn't stand a chance. James stood in the command center, surrounded by maps and communication screens, trying to make sense of the situation. Lyrian stood by his side, her face as unreadable as ever, but James could see the flicker of concern in her eyes. They had seen this before. The Empire's strategy had always been the same: attack, overwhelm, and crush. But this time there was something different. This wasn't just a battle for survival. This was the final stand. "We need a plan," James said, his voice steady despite the urgency that pressed on him. "We can't fight this battle head-on, we have to outsmart them." Lyrian nodded. "The battle station is too powerful to take on directly, but we know its weak points. It's heavily armored, but there are blind spots, areas where its shields are weaker. If we can infiltrate their defenses and plant an explosive device, we can disable the station long enough for our forces to strike." James nodded slowly, processing the information. It was risky, incredibly risky, but it was the only chance they had. "We'll need a team. A small, elite team to infiltrate the station and plant the explosives," Lyrian agreed. "I have soldiers who can handle this, but we'll need your knowledge of the Empire's layout. You've been there before." James felt the weight of her words. He had been inside the Empire's strongholds during the war, but that had been years ago. The Empire had likely changed, adapted. Still, he knew that his familiarity with their tactics could make all the difference. He gathered a team of resistance fighters and Zorak soldiers. They were a mix of humans and aliens, veterans of the war and new recruits who had never fought in a battle like this before. James could see the fear in their eyes, but he also saw something else: determination. They weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for a future where their children could grow up in peace. The plan was simple, but it was dangerous. They would infiltrate the battle station using one of the Zorak's stealth ships, landing undetected in the blind spot of the station's shields. Once inside, they would plant the explosives in key locations, and then escape before the station could retaliate. If everything went according to plan, they would have a small window of time to strike, but it would be tight. As James and his team boarded the stealth ship, he couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled deep in his stomach. This was it. There was no turning back now. The ship's engines hummed to life and the crew took their positions. Lyrian would stay behind, coordinating the battle from Earth, while James led the mission. It was the hardest decision he had made in a long time. Leaving Lyrian behind felt wrong, but he knew that she had her role to play, just as he had his. The journey to the battle station was silent, the tension thick in the air. James sat at the helm, his eyes focused on the stars ahead. He could feel the weight of his team's trust on his shoulders, and the responsibility weighed heavily on him. These were not just soldiers fighting alongside him. These were people, real human beings, risking everything for a chance at victory. He couldn't let them down. As they neared the station, the ship's stealth systems kicked in, cloaking them from the Empire's sensors. The battle station loomed ahead, its massive structure casting a shadow over the black void of space. The station was a fortress, its surface covered in layers of armor and defensive shields. It was designed to withstand the most powerful weapons in the galaxy. But James knew its weaknesses. He had studied the Empire's designs, and he knew that with the right strike, they could take it down. They landed in the station's blind spot, the ship's landing gear touching down on a metallic surface that vibrated under their feet. James motioned for the team to disembark, and they moved quickly, their movements synchronized and silent. They had no time to waste. The corridors inside the station were eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos of the battle outside. James led the team through the winding halls, his mind racing as he mapped out the path in his head. The explosive devices they carried were small but powerful, designed to disable the station's core systems long enough to create a window for their escape. They reached the first of the key locations, a maintenance hatch that led to the heart of the station. James could feel the weight of the mission pressing down on him, but he couldn't afford to hesitate. With a swift motion, he activated the explosive device and set the timer. The team moved on, planting explosives in every critical location they could find. As they worked, the tension in the air grew thicker. James could feel the presence of the Empire's soldiers closing in, the sound of footsteps echoing through the metal halls. They had to hurry. There was no time to waste. Suddenly an alarm blared, its shrill sound cutting through the silence. The Empire had detected them. The station's defenses kicked in and the team was thrown into chaos. James drew his weapon, his heart pounding as the first wave of enemy soldiers rounded the corner. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they weren't going down without a fight. The firefight was fierce, the air thick with the sound of blaster fire and explosions. James ducked behind a pillar, returning fire as his team held their ground. He could see the fear in their eyes, but he also saw their resolve. They were in this together, and they would not let the Empire win. As the last of the enemy soldiers fell, James motioned for the team to move. They had planted the explosives, but now they had to get out. The countdown had begun, and there was no more time to waste. They rushed through the halls, their footsteps echoing as they made their way back to the stealth ship. The countdown was ticking down, and James could feel the tension in the air. They had done their part, but would they make it out in time? The ship's engines roared to life, and they took off, racing toward Earth. As they looked back at the battle station, they saw it begin to crumble, the explosions ripping through its core. The mission had been a success, but the fight wasn't over. The Empire would retaliate, and James knew that Earth's survival was still uncertain. But as he looked around at the team he had led, the people who had trusted him, he felt a glimmer of hope. They weren't just fighting to survive anymore. They were fighting for their future, for a world where peace could exist. And as long as they had that hope, they had a chance to win. James felt a heavy silence fall over the crew as they raced toward Earth. The mission had been successful, but there was still an overwhelming sense of uncertainty hanging in the air. The battle station had been destroyed, but they all knew the Empire would not be defeated so easily. They had only struck a small blow, and there was no guarantee that the Empire would back down. They had to keep fighting. As the stealth ship hurtled through space, James looked out the small viewport, watching the distant stars pass by. The destruction of the station had been a huge victory, but it had come with a cost. The Empire's forces would be relentless in their pursuit of Earth. Their battle was far from over. The crew was silent, each of them lost in their thoughts, but their resolve was clear. The resistance had struck back, and they were not going to stop. Not now, not ever. "How much longer until we reach Earth?" one of the soldiers asked, breaking the silence. His voice was low, but the tension in it was palpable. "Just a few more hours," James replied, his eyes still focused on the stars outside. "We'll be there soon." Lyrian's voice crackled through the comms, and James couldn't help but feel a surge of relief at hearing her again. It had been days since he last spoke to her, and the distance between them seemed unbearable at times. The weight of the war felt heavier when she wasn't by his side. "James," Lyrian's voice was calm but filled with urgency. "I've been monitoring the Empire's movements. They're already regrouping, and they're sending reinforcements to Earth. We can expect a full-scale attack in the next few days." James' grip tightened on the controls. He had known that the battle wasn't over, but hearing it confirmed by Lyrian made it all the more real. The Empire wasn't giving up. They couldn't afford to wait for the next attack. They needed to prepare, and they needed to do it fast. "We've already seen what the Empire can do," James said, speaking to the crew. "We've seen how they fight, and we know their weaknesses. We can't let them crush us again. We need to hit them where it hurts." One of the Zorak soldiers, a tall, armored warrior named Kale, stepped forward. "We can't just wait for them to come to us. We need to strike first, hit their supply lines, their reinforcements." "Take out their command centers," James nodded. "Exactly. We don't have the luxury of waiting. If we're going to win this, we need to be proactive." The crew began to discuss the next steps, laying out a plan to strike back at the Empire's remaining forces. It was a risky move, but they had no choice. The longer they waited, the stronger the Empire would become. They had to act now. As the hours passed, the ship drew closer to Earth. James couldn't help but think about the people he was fighting for, the civilians, the families, the children. They didn't deserve this. They didn't deserve to live in fear of the Empire's wrath. But as long as the Empire was out there, the fight would continue. When they finally entered Earth's atmosphere, James could see the damage that had already been done. Cities had been destroyed, their buildings reduced to rubble. Fires burned in the distance, and the sky was darkened by the smoke of a world at war. But even in the midst of the destruction, there was a spark of hope. The resistance was alive. The people were fighting back. "Touching down in 10 minutes, the pilot said, breaking James from his thoughts. "Get ready." James felt his pulse quicken. This was it. They were about to land in the heart of the war, and everything they had fought for was about to be put to the test. He could feel the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders, but he didn't have time to dwell on it. They needed to act, and they needed to do it now. The ship touched down with a soft thud, and James was out of his seat in an instant. He motioned for the team to move quickly, and they rushed toward the exit. As they emerged onto the war-torn ground, the sounds of battle filled the air. The Empire's forces were everywhere, and the resistance was fighting tooth and nail to hold them back. James and his team joined the fight, pushing forward with a renewed sense of determination. They were no longer just fighting for survival, they were fighting for freedom. For a future where the Empire's tyranny would no longer rule over them. As the battle raged around him, James couldn't help but think of Lyrian. She was out there, coordinating the resistance from behind the scenes, working tirelessly to keep them all safe. He knew she would never give up, just like he wouldn't, but he also knew that the fight would be long, it would be hard, and not everyone would make it out alive. The hours blurred together as the battle continued, the resistance pushing forward, taking ground inch by inch. The Empire's forces were tough, but they weren't invincible. They had underestimated humanity once before, and now they were paying the price. James fought through the chaos, his mind focused on one thing: victory. He had seen the worst of war, but he had also seen the best. The bravery, the courage, the unbreakable spirit of the people. It was that spirit that would carry them through, no matter how hard the battle became. As the day turned to night, James found himself standing at the edge of the battlefield, watching the flames of war burn in the distance. He was exhausted, his body bruised and battered, but he didn't feel defeated. The resistance had made progress. They had taken back some of their cities, and the Empire's forces were beginning to retreat. But they weren't done yet, not by a long shot. "We've made it this far," James said, his voice hoarse from shouting orders throughout the battle. "But the fight's not over. We'll keep pushing. We'll take back everything they've stolen from us." The crew gathered around him, their faces a mix of exhaustion and determination. They had come a long way, and they weren't about to stop now. "We'll fight to the end," Lyrian's voice came through the comms, clear and steady. "Together." James smiled, a small but genuine smile. "Together." The resistance had already achieved so much, but there was still more to do. They had proven that they could fight back, that they could stand up to the Empire's might. The war was far from over, but James knew one thing for certain: they weren't going to lose. The Empire may have had the power, but they didn't have the will, the heart, or the determination of humanity. And as long as there was even one person left to fight, the Empire would never win. James looked out over the battlefield one last time, the horizon glowing with the promise of a new day. They had come this far, and they weren't stopping now. The Empire had underestimated them before, but they wouldn't make that mistake again. The future of Earth, of the galaxy, was in their hands, and they would fight for it no matter the cost.